Hello, so I'm back with another lesson now that we skipped a day before yesterday, and you're welcome to comment as I journey through this topic on setting goals with God. How do you set a goal with God? Now, how many of us have been in that situation where we think we know what we want or what God wants, but He has a totally different plan for us altogether? So it isn't a surprise that you could be on a total parallel path from what God expects you to be doing, or what the end objective that God has for you is, and you have your whole set of what you think are your rules, are your goals and objectives for life. So goal setting is something that a lot of people have talked about, but the thing is, do we set our goals with God? Do you actually have that conference call, or do you have that meeting with Him and sort of journey through your roadmap of life with Him? Or are you just setting your own goals and breezing through life without really consulting God? Today we're going to be looking at, or rather I'm going to be looking at a session on how to set goals. It's not going to be conclusive, and I may have to revisit this with more detail. But generally, when we are alive, as long as we're alive, God has a plan. Because there's this term that as long as you have a pulse, God has a purpose. So if you have a pulse, God has a purpose for you. So the thing is, if God has a purpose for you, then there is a way to achieve that purpose, right? You're not just breathing. You're breathing because there is something that God wants you to be breathing, alive and kicking to achieve. And this is going to be the consistent theme whenever I come on, that there is something you ought to be doing specifically for this time, for your generation at a time like this. Esther was told by her uncle Mordecai, you were born for a time like this. Who knows? Probably that's why you're in the palace, so that you can save the Jews at this time of persecution. So we really need to be in tune and on the pulse of God. And thank God He's given us an opportunity with the sort of a lull that has come with COVID to be able to just have more time to spend with God and have more time to really reflect and see whether we are on course. Are we on course with what God has called us to do? Are we on course with our purpose? Do we even know what our purpose is in the first place? So David had an idea, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on, is David building the temple. I probably should have put that on the topic line. But when David was building or thinking of building the temple for God, he actually probably had an inkling that there should be a physical temple. And he was done with the tent thing. I mean, for a long time, the Ark of the Covenant had been in tabernacles. And tabernacles were these huge, probably like what we'd call now a dome tent or a tent. That had different chambers, and the innermost was the Holy of Holies, where the ark was placed. And people had beautiful houses. I mean, by then civilization had moved, was really operating on brick and mortar, pretty much, right? So it didn't make sense to David that he should go into a makeshift or a temporary structure to worship his God. So he said to Nathan the prophet, here I am living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring. That's what God responded, to succeed your own flesh and blood, and I will establish your kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name. It's as if David had an idea that there should be a house for God, right? And it says, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So usually when you have an idea that you should be doing something, it probably is an idea that God has given you in the first place. A lot of us may not go out on a fasting or a mountaintop to go and find out what God wants us to do, but it's just something you feel prompted to do at a particular time. And that inkling usually, well, could be the prompting of God to tell you, do this. And for David, you don't see anything spectacular. He just had the idea that it's something that he should be doing, that he should, excuse me, build the temple for God. And David actually goes ahead to say, here I am in a house of cedar, which is a reasoned conversation. It makes perfect sense for him to think that way. Here I am in a house of cedar where the ark of God remains in a tent. So you could be saying, here I am achieving in every area except probably a relationship with God. Or here I am, with all these accolades, but I'm not giving back to society. There must be something that is tugging at your heart. At any one given time, the soul of a human being reaches towards something more. And that is how God created us. Solomon says in the book of Proverbs, I believe he's the one who writes and says that God put eternity in us. Somehow we want to have more. Somehow you want to achieve more. You always want to seek to engage at a higher level and achieve more, right? So on your growth path, there are things that will be long term, there's some that will be medium term, and others will be short term. Your long term can be seen as your overall objective in life. What is it that you want to achieve in life? What is it that you want to be said to have done while you are on earth? And that is probably what we'd call your impact or your life work, which I talked about in the previous video just before this one, and you might want to go there. But for now, we're looking at the more broken down version of that life plan, where you have timelines and you have certain parameters for that general thing that you want to do. So some people will want to at least impact somebody, and that specific group of people will be defined over time. It may be defined to a more accurate precision over time. So I've been reading a lot of John Maxwell recently, and he started out with leading a church. So he thought that, church folk were his people. And somewhere along the line, he realized he was actually good with, raising leaders. So it stopped being about a congregation to leadership. And then, he kept fine-tuning it to a point where now he is, working with business people or working with people who want to grow other people, right? So the life work here is huge. It is like something that you barely can grasp. And I think a lot of times we stop at defining, or we get shy at defining our life work because it is magnanimous. But it is supposed to be magnanimous. It's supposed to shock you. It's not supposed to be something you can achieve by yourself, and it's not supposed to be, most of the time it won't even be something that you can achieve in your lifetime. You're not going to achieve it in your lifetime because it is too big for you. It is just beyond your comprehension. So then you look at how the men who have gone before David, we had Abraham, you had Isaac, you had Jacob, people who had promises from God, and that's where it starts. In my opinion, that's where it starts. It starts with the promise of God. What has God promised you? And if you are going to seek after achieving your purpose on earth, it needs to be hinged on something beyond just you. It needs to be hinged on what is God's plan for your life, right? So after what is God's plan for your life, then we start to get ideas on what to do on a 5-year basis, on a 3-year, on a 2-year, on a 1 year, on 6 months, on 3 months, in 1 month, in 1 week, in 1 day. And that is the goal setting. But for the larger picture, that before you break it down, it needs to come from God himself, who tells you, maybe through a dream, or maybe through an inkling, or maybe even through somebody else, like your grandmother or your granddad. I was listening to William McDowell the other day. He was talking about how in a concert, it was in a concert where he was sharing just how his grandfather told him that he would lead many in worship. I believe, paraphrased, that he would be a great worshiper, he'd be a great person who'd impact many lives. So as general as that sounds, it sort of put him on a roadmap to think about how great he would be or how significant his life would turn out to be. And as much as we sort of diminish that word, the spoken word is actually a seed. It is a seed that is planted in our souls, in our hearts. So if somebody said something about you, even if you forget it later on in life, it's still a seed, it's still something within you. And the fact that God has planted something in you that ought to be achieved in a certain framework, in a certain timeline probably, then you need to be asking and consistently asking whether you're on the right path to that greater goal. And that path will be marked by certain events and certain deliberate activities, which are your goals. So when David decides that he's going to build this temple, the first thing that he thinks of is the resources to do it. And as God responds to him and tells him that you're not the one who's going to do it, he's actually garnering the resources to achieve that major project for God. Now, he knew it would take time, he knew it would take resources. So the first thing he does is to start to accumulate those resources over time, so that by the time he is handing over the baton, or Solomon is succeeding him, it is actually a time that he has reached a significant level of resource accumulation or building, that he's now ready to hand over the project to Solomon, right? But in his own undertaking, he had done what was necessary for him to reach a certain level where he could actually give a decisive plan to Solomon. There was actually a blueprint, what you'd call a design. There's actually a blueprint, and there were a significant mobilization of people who would actually support Solomon. And he spoke to these people, so it wasn't like he just thought about it and left it at that. He gathered the resources in people, in material, and he actually even had a plan, a blueprint on how the structure would look like and even where it would be. He identified the land where he made a sacrifice at the threshing floor of Aruna, where there was this great plague, and God stayed the plague because David made a sacrifice, in this land. So that parcel of land, Aruna's, I believe his name was Aruna, his land ended up being where God would end up having his temple. But you see, there were stages and there were steps to it, but the bigger concept was, let's have a place for God to be worshipped. Let there be a physical place where God can be worshipped, right? And let it not be a tabernacle or a tent. That's what he wanted. Just that God would have a place of worship. That's it. And just that idea alone sparked a whole other series of activities and focused his energy. That's the other thing. You need to focus your energy, because you see the level of thought he put to it. If you read the book of 2 Samuel, I believe chapter 7 or 2nd of 1st Chronicles, towards the end, he talks about how he gathered those resources. So it is not in vain that you have a grand wish, even if it's a bucket list kind of wish. You still have you will have aspirations. You want to see some part of the world rehabilitated, or part of your community. You want to see poor people or people who have underprivileged backgrounds be able to afford a university level education or employability, whatever it is that it is. It seems like a huge task, or it would seem like a very significant, magnanimous task, even to start. Whoever thought of the internet, whoever thought of a search engine like Google, people who change the dynamic of how we live today, even from mobile phones. When you think about Steve Jobs, whatever the ideas were to have a computer, a handheld computer literally a machine that was as powerful as a PC but handheld. Those are concepts that over time needed an energy, needed resources, needed a focus that would bring them to life. So you may not complete it. They were passed on to the next generation. There's a lot of fine tuning that was involved, but it began somewhere. So if you're sitting on a concept or an idea, then you're sitting on your goals, because your goals will be a direct result of your wild ideas, of your dreaming, of your conceptualization, of your, your ideas. Your ideas are seeds. You need to plant them. If you don't plant the seed, then you don't have an activity or a project to water and to weed and to give shelter and protection to those seeds or seedlings until they reach maturity. So your whole activity of life will lose meaning or focus because you failed to nurture and plant a seed of an idea that God has given you. It's an idea that God has given you. Remember, at the beginning we said it's not random that you're thinking of doing certain things. It is actually not random that you have this thought to do something or achieve something. By nature, we will always seek to stretch. By nature, we will seek to accomplish something great. Greatness is in each one of us. It's just how we are. It is how we are wired to seek to be great, to seek to achieve something. And that significance comes from acting upon the thing that is the vehicle of our achievement, or our desire for something to be actualized. Our significance is from doing something about that which you want to accomplish. If you don't do anything, then there's a sense that you're not doing enough in life, like you've let yourself down. And it's true, because if there's a concept, if there's an idea, if there's any level of creativity that you're not pursuing, it means that you're wasting yourself. It's not the idea that is wasting, it is actually you, because you would have done something with that idea. If you ran with it, you would have become a great person. You would have achieved something. If you ran with it, you would have actually stretched yourself. In the process of it, you'd have been a great person. Your name would probably be a household name because of what you sought to achieve, even if you didn't do it out of selfish reasons. In fact, the more people you want to impact, the more your name is going to be great, because people associate more with people who do things selflessly rather than those who are selfish about what they're trying to do. So we see that this, the verdict that is passed by God is, you're not the one who's going to do this. It is actually your son who, I'm going to ensure that you are succeeded by your own blood. And they're the ones, that is Solomon, who is going to, and we see Solomon actually does build the temple, but David, he had a huge head start from David. He had a huge head start. And David had gone ahead to mobilize not just people, but resources. And over time, he had built up a good enough foundation in even material, even buying the land, identifying it, so that, Solomon wasn't running blind. So it's always easier to step into God's plan and not man's. You don't want to be working in your own plan, because that requires a lot more effort. The coming together of things is really identified by how godly a plan is. When resources meet opportunity, opportunity meets preparedness, when the idea has fertile ground to be sown into. The reason it has fertile ground is because God prepared you in advance. I keep referring to this, Ephesians 2:10 verse, because you are a masterpiece, created for works, created before time. Created for works that were prepared for you before even the age began. Because if God hadn't prepared this thing for you to do, then your life would be aimless. But your life is actually purposed. It's just that you probably don't know that it's purposed, or you haven't tapped in to cooperate with that purpose. You don't even know it exists. But your life was already purposed. By the time you were born, it was handcrafted that, you would meet the purpose. Your makeup, your personality, your sense of identity, your skills, your attributes would actually match the very thing that God would be seeking to achieve. If you look at Esther, it wasn't a coincidence that she was beautiful. She was not only beautiful, but she had a stubborn uncle who pushed certain things, and he wasn't about to let her just become reckless. She had to take responsibility because of the firmness of her uncle. So there are things that we think, oh, poor girl, she's an orphan, but maybe that's the person who she needed. That was her destiny enhancer or helper. That's the exact character that she needed to grow up under his household in order for her to have the level of decorum and probably even character and firmness that it required for her to actually rescue the children of Israel from the persecution or the imminent plan to kill them. So you can imagine, if the plan went through, what would have become of Esther? She would have died. But she needed to have a focused uncle who understood the things that God stood for her to also come in and join with the plan of God by obeying her uncle. So it wasn't a coincidence that Mordecai was her guardian. It wasn't. So it's easier for you to step into God's plan and not man's. If it's God's plan, you will find a way, because the way was already created for you. You're just joining in with that plan. You're just cooperating with it. It's like if you didn't know that there was a route to a certain place, and you've been taking a longer route, or you've even been using the wrong route, and then suddenly someone, you look on the map and you see that there is maybe a new road, maybe it's a newly completed road or bypass or something. And when you know that it's there and you can use it and it will take you directly to where you need to go, then you use it, because it's the easier route and it's going to take you to where God needs you to be. But now the dilemma is, if you don't even know where you should be headed, then you need to know where you should be heading, and then that way you focus your activities towards this great plan. As there's a lot of significance around the temple, because that was a place of worship for David as a worshipper, and a place of sacrifice. David was also considered a leader who really sought God. And as you can imagine, a lot of that seeking and those conversations he had with God had to be in the tabernacle. And that's why he probably felt that he needed to be better, because his own house was a better place where he was sleeping, and then he has to come and meet with God in a place that isn't at that level. So physically anyway. So he was in a level, he was trying to match up God's ambience with his own ambience at home. And we see that this was really significant, because all of Israel congregated in Jerusalem for worship, and it's something he established. And because he wanted to establish that, and he knew that that was God's heart, that they worship him in Jerusalem, then it required a structure. So even this structure fed into a larger plan of God to be worshipped as the one and only true God. Why? Because if people were free to erect altars all over the place and not respect the priesthood, then they would end up easily serving other gods. So there was a larger plan to this, and God was coming from somewhere, and David was joining up with God's heart, right? So in the same way, when we have projects, we need to ask ourselves, what is the larger plan for this project? And instead of starting with the project, start with a plan, start with God's plan, and then use this project to be a vehicle. You don't do things just because other people are doing it, but there needs to be a certain conviction that this is where God wants you to go, because that's a commandment of God. You shall have no other gods. You shall only worship me and you shall, not bow down to another. So people, if they were going to go bow down anywhere, it was likely that they would actually be bowing down to the wrong God, also because there wasn't an appropriate authority to guide their form of worship. So it would be easy for them to get derailed. So there is no purpose or goal that God gives without a means to achieve it or a plan. So there's a larger picture, and God reveals everything. And best of all, we walk in the light since He is light. Therefore, we know He is with us. We are not in the dark. We don't go blind. God doesn't allow us to just, wallow in the dark and seeking to find out what He needs for us to do. He actually provides all the answers and all the resources if we ask Him. So He doesn't just give us a task and then leave it at that. It's not going to be like, I'm going to have you do this, and yet, there's no help on how to do it. He's actually going to provide you with the way to do it, and every day, every step of the way, there'll be something new. Another thing is, you're not going to have all the resources at one go. It's actually going to be a batch at a time, one thing at a time, just one prompting at a time, one direction at a time, and when you obey that direction, another direction will be given. When you obey the thing that you're told to do, something else will be handed to you, just to help you one step at a time. So all who are called out received because they were in the will of God. Those that God calls, He receives, or rather they receive what they are called to do when they're in the will of God, right? There's a means of how to achieve something, and there is the what to achieve. There is no purpose or goal that God gives without a means to achieve. But also, you want to be at the same level with the excellency of how He wants to do something, right? So that's the means, and the how to is the skills that He gives you, or the people who come around you to support your activities. He said to Moses, I will make you like a god to Pharaoh. That is a perception He gave Pharaoh, that Moses was actually a god, and that perception was very necessary for Pharaoh to respect the words of Moses. And at some point, he finally came around to respect Moses. Even the servants of Pharaoh started to fear Moses. If you read I believe it's chapter 11 of the book of Exodus. Similarly, the plan to save the world from the bondage of sin and death was accompanied by miracles, signs, and wonders. After Jesus had fasted and prayed for 40 days, He had strength to overcome. There will be miracles, there will be signs, there will be wonders, just for God's plan to come to be. So it's not going to just be about the expected, achievable thing. At some point, God will give you a boost or a lift, especially if it's something that He wants to achieve on earth. And He'll give you the strength to overcome. As we saw with Jesus, He was given strength after His 40-day fast. So many stories are recorded of men at war who got strategies from God, or for defeat, including under the leadership of Deborah, where it is recorded in her song that even the nature itself, the river, I don't know if it's River Jabbok, I think, the mountains joined in the battle. There was hail, there was, a change in the weather pattern, so that it guaranteed that the children of Israel would win the war. That is the supernatural. Sometimes God will use in fact, most of the time, there will be something extremely supernatural just to bolster His work. Remember, it's not about you, it's about the plan that God has. And He's using you as a tool. So you are complying with a larger than life most of the time plan. You are now being involved in His plan as His masterpiece. You're being used as a tool. So the goals will come down under certain, larger achievements that God wants you to do. And those things will take time, as we have seen, and that time will be well spent if there's activity towards achieving that. But if you just park the idea, then you're not just wasting the plan, you're wasting yourself, because that is the very reason why you exist. to do those activities that will achieve the plan of God within a framework. Remember, a goal is time sensitive, so there has to be within a framework of a timeline, and you have to gather the resources, the people and the things, and the timing to do it needs to be pretty tight. Immediately we step into something great for God. He arms and protects us. Again, you need protection from the elements of opposition. There'll be numerous opportunities for opposition. If you think about Tobias and Sanballat, they opposed Nehemiah when he was rebuilding the wall. There is no indication that Nehemiah got a direct directive from God to build the wall, to rebuild the wall. Again, that's how our inclinations will come. They will be like, I need to do this. I just need to do this. He just felt this, prodding or pushing to do this thing, and he went ahead and did it. With the help of God, he was able to achieve it. And even when there was opposition, God gave him the strength and the wisdom, because at some point it was even to the point of deception, through even a prophet, I think. And there are people who are telling him things that were false so that they would put fear in him. So God will arm you and protect you. He will give you ways and means. It's not that you will expose yourself, but even as you're guarding yourself, you're incubating your idea, there'll be supernatural protection as well. David records, you make my feet like those of a deer and teach me how to war. The how to will also come from God. The tactics, the strategies to achieving that project will come from God. Not only is the plan given, so is the human enablement, the power, the authority and resources to achieve it. And that is why you end up saying, to God be the glory, this thing has been achieved, right? And that's how come the temple was really a beautiful, magnificent building, because God was 100% behind it. So whatever you're planning to do, go ahead and ask God if that is His plan, or is it your plan alone? If it is indeed His plan, remember, for all the men, even for Nehemiah, he fasted and he prayed. Before he set out, he prayed. Even while the king was asking him, what is making you so sad? Right there at the throne of a king who commanded territories, he made a short prayer and he answered, my city is in ruins. Could you please give me time of leave to go and rebuild? So in the step by step, in the steps that precede the actualization, every step of the way you need to be engaging God, and that is how you set goals with God. Know His plan and then walk with Him every step of the way. So I'm going to see you in the next video. Stay connected.